Today we'll continue with our reviews of the book of Acts. This will probably be the last week I do this, and then I'll be moving on to a new book, a new subject. But today's overview is going to be about justice, especially talking about justice in the legal system, justice in the courts, justice in policing, and we'll find out that justice in these areas is very important to God. Now, as you know, I always look at how many times something is spoken about. I figure it like this: if God talks about something a lot in the Bible, it must be important to Him. And talking about justice here in the book of Acts, this happens a lot. So I know it's important to God. Now, in the book of Acts, as you know, there's 28 chapters. And examples of injustice in the courts, in policing, in imprisonment, in torture, and various things is in 14 out of 28 chapters. That's half of the chapters in the book of Acts deal with injustice. This must be really important to God. And we know it is important to God, because all through the Old Testament there's many verses that talk about justice in the courts, about honest judges, about not buying justice and not bribing, and having equal justice for the poor and the rich. Now, this is an important issue in today's world as well. Now, a lot of people in our country today, they want to go to extremes. One side just says, police are bad, let's do away with them. Another side says, police can do no wrong. I think we should be more sensible and more honest and say that there's good and bad in policing, there's good and bad in the courts, and there's good and bad in our justice system. Rather than throwing the whole thing out or going to one extreme or the other, let's support, when something good happens, let's support it with our words and who we support politically. And when something bad happens, let's not support it. I think that's the honest way to be. Now, in the book of Acts, here's some of the things that happened, just to kind of overviewing a little bit. There was a lot of torture going on. Now, torture became a big issue in our country after 9/11, especially. And our country, our politicians decided and said publicly that torture would be allowed. And as an American citizen, I find this repulsive. We should not be involved in torture in any way. But we can look back here in the Bible, the book of Acts, and see many tortures that happened. Just look at the rest of Jesus Christ that happened before the book of Acts was written. Jesus was blindfolded and beat in the face and made fun of and humiliated. Jesus was spit on. Jesus was bound in very uncomfortable bindings. Jesus was whipped thoroughly, almost to the point of death. Jesus was tortured by being nailed to a cross. Jesus was arrested falsely. He was falsely accused. And Jesus was put in fake courts that were there just to convict him with false witnesses. Jesus was the victim of crowd control, where the people whipped up the crowds with conspiracy theories and filled them with fear and convinced the crowds to turn against Jesus. So this all happened in the life of Jesus. I mean, the central story of our Bible is the arrest and the torture and the death and the killing and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's full of examples of injustice. So even before the book of Acts, God showed how important justice was to Him and how much He wants us to live in a just world. So in the book of Acts, we find beatings. We find beatings with rods, with little clubs and sticks. We find people locked in distress positions through the use of stocks and bindings and chains. We find people put in isolation and deep into dark prisons where they had no light and they had sensory deprivation. They also used whippings and stonings. All these things just in the book of Acts alone. These were many forms of torture. And some of these forms of torture we see in the world today. There are still countries where they will take somebody and beat them with rods as a punishment. Usually they do this in public. In our own nation, our own country, We see isolation, sensory deprivation. We see stress positions and bindings, and hopefully not beatings, but sometimes we see beatings too. Also in the book of Acts, there were imprisonment without conviction. We see that today. People in prison waiting their trial, sometimes for years, not declared guilty of anything, yet they're in jail for a long time. And in the book of Acts, we see people declared innocent and still kept in jail. In the book of Acts, we see false arrest, false seizure, and the binding of people. Today we use what we call handcuffs. Back in those days, it was chains and ropes. We see people put in false charges. And we see overcharging, where if someone did some small thing wrong, it's built up to be much worse than it is. And it's called overcharging. That happens constantly in America today. Almost any time anybody is arrested, the police officers arresting them overcharge them intentionally. And I can say that from personal experience, from family members and friends I've known. It seems like it happens every time. Some of you have not had much experience with the legal system, and you might think that everything's all hunky-dory and beautiful, like I used to think. But if you have experience with the legal system, you'll know that it's terrible and it's unjust. And one of the great injustices is this overcharging. Also, there's forced confession in the book of Acts. People were forced to confess, being threatened or physically abused in order to get a confession. Also in the book of Acts, there's two places at least, where money was paid to buy justice or to buy freedom. That happens a lot today. If you have money, you can get a lot better chance at getting off from charges than if you don't have money. If you can afford a private lawyer, you have a much better chance of getting off easily. It makes a huge difference. But if you can't afford it, you're going to sit in jail. If you can't afford bond or bail, if you can't afford a good lawyer, you're going to sit in jail a long time and get charged with unfair charges in many cases. In the book of Acts, there's conspiracies between citizens and law enforcement. And there's the use of fear and conspiracy theories and fake information to turn a crowd against somebody, to whip up the public. This happened over and over in the book of Acts. False information was put out to the public. The public was full of fear. Conspiracy theories were created to make the people afraid, to feel like they had to take action. And the crowds would turn against the apostles and preachers of the gospel because they are whipped up with fake information. The Bible shows us over and over that large groups of people can be influenced by liars and can use that information, that false information, to hurt people. There's so much happening in the Bible that's so true today. And I want to read for you just a couple of examples. I have 6 pages of examples in Acts of injustice that I have typed up. So I only want to read to you just a couple of examples, because I don't want to sit here and read for an hour or two for you. But you can read the book of Acts yourself and see what it says about justice. So here's the first one. This is in chapter 22, verse 27 through 35. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, seeing Paul in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. They saw Paul in the temple. Paul was in public. He was in a house of worship. They saw him there. They decided to pick this opportunity to arrest him. And you see, they stirred up the crowd. Fake information, getting the crowd to be afraid and be on their side so that they can make a false arrest. So they laid their hands on him. They seized him. They arrested him. They probably tied him up. But it was a forcible taking of Paul's body. And they were crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone, everywhere, against the people and the law in this place." So they're making this speech in front of the crowd, turning them against Paul. They say, "This is the man who is teaching everyone, everywhere." That obviously is a huge exaggeration, very similar to overcharging. He was teaching everyone, everywhere, against the people. They didn't have a specific thing to accuse him of, just that he was against the people. He's against you. You need to hate this man and hurt this man because he's against you. And he's against the law. And he's against the temple. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. They accused him of bringing Gentiles into the Jewish temple, which he did not in this particular case. However, Gentiles are supposed to be allowed in the temple. There's a place called the Court of Gentiles, which is made for Gentiles to be. But there was a little racism here. They didn't want Gentiles coming into the temple. He has defiled this holy place, for they had previously seen Trophimus and the Ephesian with him in the city, and they assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. The people were angry and afraid. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. The people were so angry based on these false charges that they grabbed Paul, they seized him, and they began to beat him, which is torture, of course. But they wanted to beat him to the point of death. They wanted to kill him. Well, the Roman soldiers heard about this, the Roman authorities, and they sent some soldiers down. And they came in and rescued Paul from this beating before he was dead. When they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the tribune came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. So they saved him from being beaten to death by the crowd. But what did they do then? They arrested him. They didn't have any charges. They didn't know what he had done wrong. In fact, he had not done anything wrong. But they arrested him, and they bound him with chains, putting him in a very uncomfortable position, with chains cutting into his skin. The tribune inquired who Paul was and what he had done. Some in the crowd were shouting one thing and some another. Isn't that kind of like current events today? People in the crowd just shouting to accuse people of things or to lock people up in jail. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, the tribune could not learn the facts. The facts were distorted. The facts were confused. There was a lot of false facts and bad information running right out there. It's just like today's world. He ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And when he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. For the mob of the people followed, crying out, "Away with him." So the crowd was saying, "Away with him, away with him, away with him, away with him." Basically saying, lock him up, lock him up, lock him up. The Bible is very current. Things that are happening today were happening then, and the Bible speaks about these things. Now, the next example I'm going to give you is in Acts chapter 24. And after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul, and when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude." So here's a lawyer coming up to be the prosecutor against Paul, and he's speaking to the Roman authorities. The first thing he does is butter them up. He's showing his allegiance to these Roman authorities and telling the Roman authorities how good they are, how great they are. He's puffing them up. He's building up their egos. Listen to that again. "Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation." It's like, hey, he's making the nation of Rome better. He's making it greater. He's doing reforms. He's changing things for the better. They're just complimenting this guy. They're just kissing his butt, basically. For every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. That's how they started off, ingratiating themselves with the person in charge. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. For we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will not be able to find out from him about everything in which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in these charges, affirming that all these things were so. So he's he's a silver-tongued devil, you know. He's accusing falsely an innocent man. And he makes all these false charges. And the crowd, the common man that's just there, joins in the accusations and affirming that the accusations are true, even though they're not true. Now that was just a couple examples. I could have read for an hour or two, just out of the book of Acts, all the injustices that happened. Now, moving up into the modern world a little bit, I can tell you from my personal experience how awful these things are and how they destroy people's lives. I know an example of a person that I know that was accused of a very, very small problem. That had a restraining order against them, and they weren't allowed to communicate with this other person. And this other person texted this young man and asked for an answer to a question. So the young man texted back, one text, nothing unkind, just a nice information text that she had requested. And for doing that, this young man was arrested for breaking the restraining order. A very, very small infraction. When the police came to arrest him, the police told him, well, this is a very small infraction. You'll be in jail for maybe one overnight. You'll get out on bail. Probably cost you $200 to get out. And then you'll be released. It's a very small crime. So just come along and cooperate. Let me take you away and arrest you. So the police handcuffed him, put him in the police car and arrested him. And then the police went and charged him with a very high felony, aggravated stalking, a very serious, serious crime, which the police knew this was not the crime that was committed. The police knew it was just a text, and it was an entrapment. The police said that the crime was small and that it would be a very small charge. The police was lying, and the police overcharged. So this young man was taken to jail. Because he was put on a really high felony, he was put in the part of the jail where people have been there a long time that were murderers and rapists and committed serious felonies. Because of the overcharging, this young man was put in there with very dangerous people and ended up being raped. All because of the dishonesty of this police officer. And the policy that police departments have of overcharging everybody. Not only was the bail not $200, the bail was $35,000. This is for one text. So he was raped, he was in jail, he had to rely on family members to put their mortgage, their house up to bail him out as a surety for the bail. He had to go in and out of courts for a year. He had a appointed representative, one of those free ones you get when you can't afford one. And this lawyer had 160 cases. He would just show up, talk for 2 or 3 minutes, and walk into a hearing. It was not a fair representation at all. Eventually, this young man got some friends to help him hire an attorney, and things were much better at that point. But still, he ended up suffering greatly. He suffered immensely because of the injustice of the criminal system. Also, the people that helped him suffered because of what was going on. When people are put in jail, they may not have any income. They probably don't, most of them. So if they want to buy things like soap, toilet paper, toothpaste, they have to buy it from the jail commissary. And the only way the money gets there is if somebody else puts the money in. So the people that are in someone's family, the people that care about this person, are being charged for the crime this person was put in jail for. They're having to pay for things. The person arrested often can't afford an attorney. Who pays for it? The family. There's court costs involved. Who pays for it? Usually the family. When you're on probation, who pays for it? A lot of times it's the family, because the person that's been arrested for little or nothing in most cases can't afford it. They're very, very, very poor, and they may not have a job. And if they are out on probation, or they're out and they still owe money, it's very hard to get a job when you have charges against you, because no one wants to hire you. It's a vicious cycle. So truly, in the world today, we have justice for sale. If you've got a lot of money and a good lawyer, you can get a lot better justice, or even get off sometimes. But if you're a poor person, your hopes of getting justice are extremely small. So I hope you'll take this serious. I hope you understand that this is not a political thing. And this is not an aberration from gospel. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus said, I have come to set the prisoners free. Jesus also said that on Judgment Day, when you stand before me, I'm going to ask you how you treated prisoners. Did you have compassion on prisoners and help prisoners? This is part of being a Christian, to believe in justice and to seek justice in the world. So like I said earlier, when something good happens with the courts or the justice or the policing, support it. It's good. When something bad happens, speak out against it. And seek justice in all things in your life. I hope that you learned something today, and I hope you'll read the book of Acts again and see all these examples, 14 examples of injustice in the book of Acts. All right, I'll see you next week, and we'll be on a new subject and a new book. Thank you.